고민부터 하면 돈을 못 벌어요. 앞으로도 못 벌어요. 하나라도 제대로 벌자. 다시 한번 강조드리지만 꼭 따져보시라.
투자 나침반 3월부터 시작이니까 이제 얼마 안 남았습니다, 여러분.
안녕하세요. 와이스트릿 송일아 기자입니다. 오늘은 변호사의 나라 미국, 엔지니어의 나라 중국이라는 이 주제로 브레이크넥이라는 책을 쓰신 댄왕 씨를 모시고 이야기를 한번 나눠보도록 하겠습니다.
Okay, hello there. It's great honor to have you here on this our channel, Wall Street today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
첫 번째 질문부터 드릴게요. 저서 이 브레이크넥에서 미국을 변호사의 나라로 중국을 엔지니어의 나라로 정의를 하셨는데요. 이 대비가 현재 두 나라를 표현하는 중요한 이유가 뭘까요?
If we take a look at some of the most senior leaders inside China's Communist Party, many of them had engineering degrees of a very Soviet sort. So in the year 2002, every member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which is the highest ruling echelon in the Communist Party, all 9 of them had degrees in engineering. And so they were trained as electrical engineers or hydraulic engineers or geologists, etc. And what is it that engineers like to do? Well, they like to build a lot of stuff, whether that is roads or bridges or nuclear, solar, wind, or coal power, or high-speed rail or homes. They sort of treat building as everything. At the same time, they can be awfully literal-minded about treating society as just another building material to be torn down and remolded as they wish. So that's why I spend a lot of time thinking about the one-child policy as well as zero COVID. Now, if we compare that with the United States, which I call the lawyerly society, many of the first American presidents were lawyers. First 13 presidents from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln were lawyers. In the modern day, most presidential nominees from the Democratic Party are also lawyers. The issue with lawyers is that they are much better at blocking rather than building. And so this is why in the US, there are few homes. The transportation infrastructure is terrible. They can't build their own nuclear power plants, unlike the Koreans. They can't build the memory chips, unlike the Koreans. They can't build the electric vehicle batteries either, unlike the Koreans.
Blocking and the building. That contrast is very interesting.
Yes.
America is the blocking and China is always building, right?
Some things should be blocked. Sometimes they don't need another big bridge. Sometimes they don't need another trash incinerator. And they definitely didn't need the one-child policy. So some things need to be blocked. At the same time, I think that society needs to have a little bit of physical dynamism. It's better not to look very, very stuck. And I think that both countries have something to learn from the other.
미국의 항공사 보잉은 엔지니어링 문화를 잃었기 때문에 경쟁력을 잃었다라고 표현을 하셨는데요. 왜 그렇게 생각하시는지.
Boeing used to be a very impressive company, that it was a very substantial innovator. And over the last 10 years, it has had a much worse safety record and has ceded a lot of the market to Airbus in particular. And I think a lot of the people would trace some of the start of Boeing's problems to the time when it acquired another aviation company called McDonnell Douglas, which was much more financial driven rather than mechanical engineering driven. And so Boeing, when it moved its headquarters away from Seattle in Washington State to Chicago in Illinois, when Chicago is much more of a financial commodity trading hub, people thought that it meant something, that Boeing was giving up on its engineering past and embracing finance. But then Boeing has also moved a few years ago from Chicago, Illinois to Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And so maybe it has evolved from embracing first finance into now embracing the government, but it is not quite as good as just doing engineering.
그렇다면 보잉이 다시 경쟁력을 찾기 위해서는 어떻게 해야 되는 건가요?
More engineers.
More
I think that
engineers
is better for companies that need to fly pretty complicated pieces of machinery in the air, where people really want to make sure that there's good safety values. And Boeing has prioritized some of the wrong financial measures. That's become overly complicated in too many ways. And so it should rediscover the joy of engineering.
트럼프 행정부는 일론 머스크 같은 이 엔지니어링의 아이콘을 전면에 내세워서 이 정부 효율을 극대화하고 또 규제를 철폐하려고 애썼는데요. 반면 또 부작용도 컸어요. 이에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하시나요?
I agree with you that Elon Musk is an icon, but I'm not sure if he's an icon of engineering. He's mostly, I think, an icon of the internet. I think he is a little bit of a gremlin, which is kind of a bit of a troll on the public consciousness. So you're right that Elon Musk has been an incredible engineer. There's no doubt about that, that he being able to build SpaceX as well as Tesla is actually pretty incredible, and no one should downplay that sort of success. At the same time, Elon Musk has probably taken too many drugs. And he spends too much time online on social media. And I think that he is not any longer a straightforward engineer. He's much more of a social media influencer.
So not now he's an engineer, but more the enthusiastic in the internet, right?
Yeah,
And,
he plays too many video games, too many drugs. But no drug would be released on the market if the side effects were as big as the positive benefits. So I really wish that we could, make Elon do less drugs and for him to achieve more of his benefits because mostly he's achieving his side effects.
트럼프는 아메리카 퍼스트를 외치면서 이 제조업 부활을 위해서 노력하고 있습니다. 하지만 반대로는 이제 고관세 정책과 반이민 정책, 과학 예산 삭감 같은 엔지니어 경쟁력을 약화시키는 그런 일들도 일어나고 있는데요. 미국의 제조업 부활을 위해서 당장 필요한 것들이 무엇일까요?
But if we take a look at some of the results of manufacturing in his year last year in 2025, what we saw is that after the tariffs, the US lost about 70,000 manufacturing jobs, that there have been all sorts of business uncertainty among companies that do not want to deal with these tariffs. And I think one of the most catastrophic decisions by the Trump administration, which I've written about, is the decision under his Department of Homeland Security secretary to raid a Hyundai electric vehicle battery plant in the state of Georgia and deport about 300 Korean engineers in chains.
right.
And so I think that if I were an engineer in France or Taiwan or South Korea, I would probably remember what happened and be a little bit less enthusiastic about being sent on a job to the United States if this is the sort of treatment that the government could deliver to you.
하지만 AI 같은 이 최첨단 기술들은 여전히 미국에서 주로 이제 탄생하고 있습니다. 이게 자유를 중시하고 또 자본주의 시스템을 가졌기 때문이 아닐까요?
I think that Americans can certainly are indeed very creative. They dream up of many new things. People like Elon Musk have been very creative, and sometimes the drugs help with that. So it's certainly possible. And I think the US is thinking a lot about inventing new technologies. And I'm speaking to you from my office at Stanford University, which has driven quite a lot of different scientific and technological breakthroughs as well. But the Chinese are not very far behind when it comes to AI. They are following pretty quickly. The US advantage on AI right now seems to be more modest than decisive. And if we look beyond artificial intelligence, if we take a look at a lot of things that China is good at, including things like consumer electronics, putting together batteries, all sorts of manufactured products, it's the Chinese that are inventing a lot of these critical new industries of the future. And that's because it has a giant workforce of people who are trying to solve 3 new problems a day before breakfast. And so they are producing all sorts of new innovations as well. So in my view, although the US is ahead on AI, it doesn't seem to be that strong of an advantage. It is only a modest lead. And in terms of almost everything else, the Chinese are arguably leading the Americans.
Many people say the US, the first mover, and China is fast follower. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that. And I think that it is not so bad of a position to be in because China is a fast follower with a focus on fast. So the Chinese are not super far behind. They sometimes spend less money to get the same results. They tend to move very, very quickly generally. So if we take a look at the automating making sector, for example, my understanding is that it takes about 5 years for an American automaker to think up of a new car model and release it on the streets, whereas the Chinese move at the speed of about 18 months. And so the Chinese are just moving much more quickly than the Americans, and they are also following pretty effectively. Now, if we take a look at some industry like the solar photovoltaic industry, solar panels, we can see that it was the Americans who invented the first solar cells in Bell Labs in New Jersey. But who cares who's inventing it when the entire industry has moved to China? So China owns about 90% of the global solar industry. The Americans are able to say for the history books that they invented solar. In my view, it's more important to win on the industry.
미국이 비토크래시, 거부권 국가가 됐다고 이제 지적을 하셨는데요. 미국이 중국으로부터 배워야 할 공학적인 마인드는 어떤 것들이 있을까요?
I think that the US is a vitocracy, and this is a term from my colleague at Stanford, Francis Fukuyama, which is to point out that America is often way too complex in many different things. You know, in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm speaking to you from, there are 26 transit agencies over here. So between the buses and the light rail and the trains, in a pretty small area of only a few million people, there are 26 transit agencies. And I think these are the sort of things that do not make any sense. So generally, America is too complex. You have very different rules just if you cross different counties. And there are too many ways for homeowners or organized groups to say no to stop construction. And so I think that the US needs to be able to recover a little bit of its ability to build and have physical dynamism. Otherwise, the future is just going to continue to be built by China.
AI 시대의 미국과 중국의 패권 경쟁, 과연 그 최종 승자는 누가 될까요?
I think it is really difficult to identify a single winner. I think that no one won the internet. Who won the internet? I think it probably wasn't the Chinese. Arguably, it wasn't the Americans. Definitely wasn't the Koreans. So I think that there is no winning on an important new technology. Right. But the Chinese are probably not losing because they have incredible amounts of power that they are building. They've been effective fast followers. A lot of the talent in Silicon Valley, in California, building artificial intelligence is still made up of many Chinese nationals. And the Chinese seem to be much more interested in using AI rather than building more sophisticated models. And so if the future is about who gets to deploy the technology, then it might be the case that the Chinese are not doing too badly here.
You know, the many Chinese people, they usually use the AI, like the ChatGPT or Gemini.
It could be that many Chinese are very enthusiastic about using AI. They love new technologies. On average, the Chinese population is a lot more optimistic than the American population on new technologies. We see that a major filmmaker about 2 weeks ago released a fun new video generated entirely by AI. This is one of China's best filmmakers. His name is Jia Shangke. And he has been making these fun videos by experimenting. And I think it is quite a little bit more difficult to have big Hollywood directors to be as playful with these things as the Chinese are.
중국의 당 지도부는 기술 관료가 주도하고 있어요. 기술 관료가 주도하는 정책이 법관이 주도하는 정책과의 결정적인 차이점이 있다면요?
The engineers are much more focused on outcomes, and they like to focus on numbers. So for a while, China's leadership was very interested in high GDP growth. So they targeted a high level of GDP growth, whether that used to be 15% or 12%, and more recently around 5%. Or they orient a lot of their decision-making around something like the one-child policy. So no woman for about 35 years was able to have a second child unless she was a minority or had some sort of official exception. Or they have these policies they treat very seriously, like zero COVID. I was living through China during the entirety of the zero COVID policy, in which the Chinese went much harder than the Japanese or the Koreans or the Taiwanese on actually enforcing zero transmissions. And it's arguably the case that they didn't care about any deaths so long as it was not COVID deaths. Now, by contrast with the lawyers, they care much more about process. They want to make sure all the rules are followed. They want to make sure that big companies are creating jobs rather than doing the job. And so the United States is much more bound up by committee work as well as discussions about rules.
And do you think the technocrat more useful way to building the technologies?
I think that the Chinese leadership definitely has a better understanding of future technologies, that the Chinese leadership has more embedded expertise into thinking about how things could grow, what different scenarios could look like. And the American government, because so many members of Congress were trained as lawyers, about a dozen have earned any degrees in the sciences. And so much of the federal bureaucracy is also made up of lawyers. It becomes just a little bit more difficult for them to assess what is actually going on. And so, in addition, you have better technocratic planning. So in China, the logistics system works very well. They build a lot of electrical power, like nuclear power. And so once you have engineers who are very interested in building homes and building logistics and building transportation and building the power too, and building factories, I think that also makes it much more easy for the country to become more scientific and technologically oriented.
Do you agree the energy power is the key factor to AI era?
It's one of the key factors. Of course, probably the most important factor is the availability of NVIDIA chips to power the compute infrastructure. So chips are very, very important, but maybe the second most important thing is the electrical power. And so it's definitely the case that the United States has most of the AI compute, most of the semiconductors, most advanced semiconductors, but China has a lot more electrical power. So, and the second most important thing, China has doing very, very well. So it is really remarkable that last year, China built about 300 gigawatts of solar power,
Right.
and the US built 30 gigawatts. China has 40 nuclear power plants under construction, and the US has 0 power plants under construction. And I think this is something that matters quite a lot if we believe that data centers are going to be needed to be powered by a lot more electrical power.
대왕 씨는 소프트웨어보다 하드웨어가 국가 경쟁력의 핵심이라고 보시는 건가요? 그렇다면 이유는 뭘까요?
Well, let's take a look at the present moment as we're speaking to each other at the end of February 2026. The stock market is having a meltdown because AI might replace a lot of software. And so we have a lot of these big software companies like IBM and Oracle that are selling off a lot of their share prices because of AI. And so right now, actually, it is software that is eating software. And actually, the physical world of electrical power and consumer electronics, high bandwidth memory made by SKhainicks, as well as DRAM made by Samsung. These things actually seem to be pretty scarce. And so actually the meltdown is happening mostly in the software sector. I've always believed that manufacturing is important. The problem with the US is that it doesn't really manufacture enough of its own goods. It's highly dependent on China for all sorts of goods that include consumer electronics, rare earth magnets, batteries, active pharmaceutical ingredients. China is making all of America's medicine. And I think that's a very bad position to be in if you're dependent on your adversary for all of your cardiovascular drugs.
미국의 AI 칩 수출 규제에도 중국의 제조 생태계는 날로 발전하고 오히려 더 강화되는 모습을 보이고 있는데요. 그 이유를 뭐라고 생각하실까요?
I think that manufacturing is something that the engineers are just better at. They have a lot more talent, both low-end talent, medium-skilled talent, as well as high-end talent. They have a lot of better infrastructure where the rail lines are right next to the ports. They have a lot more electrical power. They have dense ecosystems of suppliers in which companies sit right next to each other. They also have a highly competitive market, and they like to move fast. So when you add up all of these sort of things, it is not surprising that China is winning. It is only surprising that the United States is taking these shortcuts by saying that China has gotten to where it has only by cheating, like too many industrial subsidies or stealing. And both of these things are true, but I think they're missing the far bigger factor, which is that China has the ecosystems, it has the infrastructure, it has the logistics, and it has the people.
작년에 나타났던 딥시크 모먼트가 올해는 어떤 식으로 어떤 분야에서 또 나타날 수 있을 거라고 예상하시나요?
I think if I knew what was next, I would have a lot more money, but I don't. So I think that there's a lot of excitement about China and robots, for example. There's also a lot of excitement about China and biotechnology. So China so far has not done superbly well in biotechnology. They have not invented blockbuster new drugs like Viagra or Ozempic. And they were not a leader in mRNA vaccines. But it's possible that there's a lot of excitement there. And then there's all sorts of other technologies which seem to be a little bit less mature, like quantum or fusion, nuclear fusion technologies. So I think that the Chinese are trying to win on everything.
중국의 압도적인 이 에너지 설비량이 이 AI 전쟁의 게임 체인저가 될 수 있을까요?
I think it is a mix of chips, talent, power, and all the applications.
반면 중국은 AI를 통해서 이제 시민을 감시하고 통제하면서 개인의 자유를 침해하는 것은 점점 더 악화되는 모습입니다. 아무리 엔지니어링이 주도하는 사회라고 해도 이 같은 정책들이 다양성이나 이노베이션을 방해하지는 않을까요?
Absolutely. So China's information ecosystem is very severely restricted. A lot of journalism has become much more difficult. A lot of creative types have suffered, and a lot of movie directors have also suffered quite substantially as well. But I don't think that stops them from being a scientific superpower, because I don't think that there is very much in science that depends on the circulation of a lot of knowledge and creativity. I think a lot of scientists simply need a lot of funding. They simply need to practice, and the Chinese government is giving scientists a lot of money. And even if they are restricting the filmmakers from making films, if they're restricting the reporters from doing journalism, doesn't mean that the scientists are also constricted. So they are giving scientists a lot of money, unlike the Americans. So it is quite possible, and I think it is quite likely that China can censor a lot of information and at the same time grow to be a bigger scientific superpower.
중국의 이 엔지니어링 국가 모델이 가진 치명적인 결함이나 리스크는 뭘 꼽으세요?
The problem is that they are all engineers, and they often treat society as a building material to be torn down or remolded as they wish. Their demographic situation would not be so bad if they weren't trying to be population engineers. The economy wouldn't be so bad if they were not trying to be economic engineers by triggering a demolition of their real estate sector. And they are always trying to control things. They are trying to smack around tech company founders if the founders like Jack Ma don't listen to them enough. And so I think the fundamental problem with China is that they could win if only they could do less. If they could just do nothing, the Chinese society will probably win because the Chinese people are very good at business. They're very creative people. They are often excellent scientists and engineers. But the problem with the Communist Party is that they cannot stop themselves. they cannot stop themselves from smacking around a lot of its people and repressing them. So I think that if China doesn't do well, it's mostly because the government cannot trust its people.
And actually, I was in the Boston in 2020, and then there are so many Chinese students in the US. The many Chinese students, they don't want to go back to China. Is it the usual thing, or what do
I
you
think that it has been the case that many Chinese have wanted to leave, that many creative types move to something like Chiang Mai in Thailand, where they can do a lot of drugs and be creative and play with cryptocurrencies. Many Chinese business people and entrepreneurs have moved to Singapore, or they moved to Tokyo, or they moved to London or the United States. Many students still want to go to US universities. And there are even many Chinese middle class or lower class, working class people who have decided to fly to South America and walk across the American border. And so there's been a lot of efforts by Chinese to leave. And I think that it is an indictment of the regime that many young Chinese cannot find a job and cannot find a spouse.
왕 씨는 7년 동안 중국에서 머무르다가 다시 미국으로 돌아가셨는데 혹시 그 이유를 여쭤봐도 될까요?
I like books. So I like to read books and I hope to write more books. And in China, it is really difficult to buy books. And I think that many people have also been pretty frightened by things like the zero COVID policy. The information ecosystem has been more and more restricted. There are even not even a 3-star general in the Chinese army can feel safe because the top leader has annihilated China's high command. Many people inside the Communist Party, even at the highest levels, do not feel safe, mostly because it is really difficult to read the mind of the top leader. And so I think that it is just easier and more carefree to be in a land where Elon Musk can do whatever he wants because people tend to leave him alone.
자, 이번에는 한국 이야기를 해보도록 하겠습니다. 한국은 빠른 성장을 이루어오면서 이제 과거 권위주의 시절의 공학적 몰입도와 또 민주화 이후의 자유를 모두 경험한 나라인데요. 이제 많은 사람들은 이제 과거 시대의 이 빠른 추진력과 공학적 마인드가 굉장히 훌륭했다라고 칭찬을 하면서도 다시는 돌아가고 싶진 않다라고 이야기를 또 하고 있습니다. 이런 현상은 어떻게 볼 수 있을까요?
Well, South Korea has some successes and some problems. So some of the successes are that it still retains technological leadership in things like high bandwidth memory, in all sorts of semiconductor technologies, electric vehicle batteries. All of that has been pretty successful. But there are also a lot of South Koreans who cannot find a job and cannot find a spouse. So it is also the case that many young South Koreans do not want to have kids. And that is quite common. And I think this is actually not a very big movement in South Korea. But many Americans know about the 4B movement. No boyfriend, no husband, no sex, no children, right? So even though many people admire South Korean boy bands, it doesn't seem like the South Korean women necessarily want to marry them. So I think this is just one of these odd things that doesn't show that the country is necessarily very optimistic for the future.
한국은 지금 우수한 인재들이 공학 대신에 의학 대학으로만 몰리는 이제 문제점을 안고 있는데요. 이런 인적 자원의 편중이 이제 미래 한국 국가 경쟁력에 어떤 영향을 미칠 거라고 생각하시나요?
Well, I think that at least medicine is scientific, and I think that's better than the study of the law. But also some of the things that we see in the headlines is that Korea has had this nursing strike, and before that it had a doctor strike. And so if this is such an elite profession, why are they striking? You know, in the US, we don't see that the lawyers are all on strike. And in China, we don't see that all the engineers are on strike. And so there's something different about South Korea. Now, I think it would be great if South Korea could continue doing this, all of this amazing culture stuff. Because I think to an average young American person, South Korea has a much better brand than China. Everyone knows BTS. Everyone knows Blackpink. And people like to watch things like Parasite and Squid Game. So South Korea culture is definitely very popular. And obviously, everyone in Silicon Valley loves the high bandwidth memory chips from South Korea and through SK하이닉스. So, I think that these are all good things to create, and I wonder if the doctors can keep creating them.
의학도 이제 과학의 일종이라고 말씀하셨지만 한국의 의대 쏠림 현상은 이제 의대를 나오면 훨씬 더 많은 부를 초기에 모을 수 있다라는 젊은 층들의 판단이 작용한 결과라고 보여지는데요.
But I would be surprised. Does Samsung not have enough money? Its salary isn't good enough for the graduates of Yonsei University.
Yeah.
I think that there should be, I hope that the big technology companies can give more money to the young people so that not everyone has to be a doctor.
한국이 AI 시대의 경쟁력을 갖기 위해서는 어떤 것에 지금 집중을 해야 될까요?
Every part of the electronic supply chain that it can. Because right now it seems like AI is eating software. So software is eating software, but software is not eating hardware yet. So I think that it is really good for South Korea to continue making industry. Americans are cite that South Korean shipyards are making many more ships than the Americans. And so I think that it is, again, better for everyone to study science and technology and engineering rather than just the medical sciences. Because it feels like it is the future to be able to produce different types of hardware. On the other hand, the Chinese seem to be also very good at doing most of the things that the Koreans are good at. Chinese are trying to build more memory through YMTC and also through the Changxing memory as well.
It's CXMT, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Mhm.
And the Chinese are also very good at heavy industry, and they are also very good at building ships. So I think that South Korea needs to stay at least a few steps ahead of China, and that is a challenge.
변호사의 나라와 엔지니어의 나라가 좀 공존할 수 있는 방법은 없을까요?
Yeah, well, I think you need a lawyer to figure out what is the right portion. Maybe it needs to be 50-50. But I think the challenge is that the US and China are, if they were only a lot of lawyers and engineers, life would be a lot easier. Unfortunately, I think the US and China are also ruled by national security folks who are very paranoid and very suspicious of each other. And I think that neither government is going to simply accept that the other state is much stronger. And so I think that there are these specific flashpoints in the South China Sea or around Taiwan that they do not agree with. And it could be the case that China continues to deindustrialize the United States and threaten its economy. And so I think it is going to be challenging for them just to be friends. I don't know any engineer who's a friend with a lawyer. I think generally they like to hang out with themselves.
Do you have China has more potential to win this war of AI compared to the US?
I think that what both the US and China are very talented in is beating themselves up. So they are very good at building a wall in front of themselves and running into the wall. So competition with the US and China will go on for a very long time because whoever's ahead is going to make mistakes of overconfidence, and whoever's behind will feel the need really to catch up. And so I don't think that there's going to be one country that is going to be permanently ahead because both countries are made up of leaders who make mistakes. So top leader Xi Jinping smacked around a lot of tech founders like Jack Ma in 2021 when I was living in China, and also decided to take down a lot of the property sector. Donald Trump is right now destroying a lot of alliances and deporting a lot of Korean engineers. I think both of these moves are stupid. And so I think that whoever is ahead are going to make more stupid mistakes, and they are going to continue making mistakes, and because both systems are very prone to being dumped.
What about the Japan?
Japan is more cautious. I think that the Japanese don't make as many mistakes as the Chinese or the Americans. At the same time, they appear pretty stuck, and they have not been very high energy for a long time. I think that Korea has done very well relative to Japan. Korea is now even richer, I believe, than Japan, right? So I think that's very positive. And everybody likes these Korean cultural products like Squid Game. So I think that, if the Koreans can keep making Squid Game, the Koreans can keep making high bandwidth memory chips, that's not bad.
마지막으로 저희 와이스트릿 구독자 여러분들에게 해주실 말이 있다면요.
I think that this has been a very fun interview, and I am very interested in engaging further with my Korean readers.
네, 오늘 이렇게 브레이크넥의 제 저자인 댄왕 씨와 대화를 나눠봤는데요. 유익한 시간이셨기를 바랍니다. 감사합니다.